or do people want escapism?
No, it's absolutely true. There's often a gentle philosophical bent to them, like books on walking or books on silence or the short philosophy on birds. Not necessarily big, deep reads, but just things about the world around them.
Yeah.
Gentle, thoughtful books. In fact, Wallace, right now would be the time for you to get your book reprinted.
Oh, stop it.
Don't just do something, sit there.
Oh, thank you for that, but stop it.
I can guarantee we'd be selling a lot of that book right now. Come on, ring Penguin.
Yeah,
ring
where's
Penguin,
my publisher?
Get them.
I'd forgotten all about that book. But what would you recommend, Joe, to someone who, feels they've lost interest in reading or can't even concentrate for too long? What's one or two titles that you can recommend? Just give us one.
That's a toughie. Well, if you had a dog, I would suggest a delightful little book called How to Walk a Dog by Mike White, which is a little New Zealand. It's a lovely, fun thing. It's about the highs and lows of owning a dog and walking your dog around Wellington. So it's not a demanding read, especially if you're Wellingtonian. You'd recognise lots of places in there. Or books of short essays are always good too.
Love it.
So some of them are only 2 or 3 pages long, and you can buy a book on essays on just about anything that you're interested in.
Lovely to have you on, Joe. Thanks for being with us. That is Joe McCall, owner of Unity Books in Auckland there. While I recall, a lot of you really enjoyed The Snake Catcher and wanted to hear more about snakes. So, if you have a question about snakes for Mark the Melbourne Snake Catcher, email me, the panel at rnz.co.nz, and we will get the Snake Catcher on again. Okay, books. Phil, you're a big reader, aren't you?
Yeah, I was just worshipping at the altar of Joe there of Unity. I try and spend as much time as I can in Unity, Wellington and Auckland. What I found during lockdown is, I don't know if you have this issue, Wallace, there's some books that you just never get to because, they're just too big or they're too complicated or, your busy life just never gets you through them.
Absolutely.
So I really tried to focus on reading 1 or 2 of those, and so that was great. But what I actually found was I went back to books that I just wanted to read, and so I'm reading one at the moment about the fall of Mosul, a thing called They Will Have to Die Now, a remarkable war book about the fall of ISIS, of course, with the Iraqi army just a few years ago. It's a they're calling it a classic of war literature, and I think it probably is. It's a wonderful book, but it was just one of those books that leapt out of the bookshelf. I had to say, I've got to read that because it's timely that I do that. So it's not a particularly large book, but pretty searing sort of a book. Obviously,
here's a book, Nicky, that I read during a lockdown. Never read it. It's riveting and it's very scary. Dracula.
Huh.
Amazing book. Amazing. Nicky, Bedside Table?
Yeah, I'm not really getting into the serious reading. I was just thinking that, gosh, I'm letting the side down a bit. Maybe that's because of my work is a bit, I'm reading a lot of serious stuff I'm also writing a book at the moment, so that's kind of, my brain's quite full. So I'm looking for escapism. In my reading. Yeah, so other worlds,
Other worlds, nothing wrong with that. Very good. Nicky Pazant, Phil O'Reilly, appreciate me being with us today. Thank you very much for your time, both of you. I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow, 3:45. Till then, see ya.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, entrepreneur Sam Morgan takes his expertise and walks away from the COVID card project. But the government says he's not the only brains behind the technology. So how has it come to this? A decade on from the Canterbury quakes, EQC is still getting about 450 re-repair cases a month. Beneficiaries are set to lose $60 a week from their pay, and the struggle to get by is about to get a whole lot worse. The Green School funding fiasco manifests in an abundance of apologies from Green Party co-leader James Shaw. And a scrub fire under a blanket of snow in the Mackenzie district could take months to put out. Don't forget, you can check us out live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. The government is accused of being far too slow to act on mass contact tracing technology that could help prevent future lockdowns. One of the original COVID card backers, Sam Morgan, has pulled his team from the project, saying it's become mired in government bureaucracy. The government says it doesn't need him and a trial will go ahead at the end of the month. But ACT's David Seymour says the government needs to work with passionate people from the private sector to get a better COVID response.
This government can't cooperate even when well-talented entrepreneurs want to work with them. How are they supposed to collaborate with people who don't want to work with them when they can't even get help from people that are trying to help?
ACT leader David Seymour. The minister in charge of managed isolation says the case is now closed on how a hotel maintenance worker caught COVID-19 at a facility. The man who was working at the Ridges Hotel used a lift just minutes after a guest who later tested positive for the same strain. Megan Woods says that remains the most likely scenario for how he contracted the virus.
There have not been any other cases of that strain, the B1 strain, that have popped up in Auckland, so that we're not seeing that in the community cluster.
There is a new directive in place to make sure hand sanitizer is used every time someone goes into a lift. The Deputy Prime Minister says designating the Christchurch gunman as a terrorist entity helps deny what he and his support base believe in. Brenton Tarrant is the first individual to be given such a designation in New Zealand. It means that his assets are frozen and it makes it a criminal offence to financially support him. Winston Pieces says the terrorist entity designation is a matter of international common sense and cooperation.
Well, it means that both you and other countries around the world understand who they're dealing with, any likelihood of connectivity that would be of danger to our population or their populations.
Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters. The Chief Executive of the United Fire Brigades Association, Bill Bootsbach, has been suspended while allegations of bullying and sexual harassment are investigated by an independent lawyer. Christy McDonald QC will look into the two complaints dating back several years. Claire Siriani reports.
The UFBA board chair Richie Smith has taken over as chief executive until the allegations are fully investigated. He's urging any volunteer members with concerns of their own to access the association's advocacy service. Fire and Emergency says it first became aware of one complaint against Mr Bootsbach in 2016, which was examined by another independent investigation, but it cannot discuss the findings. FEN's chief executive Rhys Jones says he welcomes the latest probe. Mr Bootsbach has not responded to RNZ's request for an interview. Ko Claire Sirani tēnei.
In a bid to resolve the spiralling controversy over the Green School grant, negotiations are underway to see if it could be changed to a loan. Greens co-leader James Shaw has apologised for signing off on the nearly $12 million after a fierce backlash, calling it an error of judgment. RNZ can also reveal a big concern from Treasury was the school had yet to be fully registered as a private school. Mr Shaw says he understands the school has approached officials to find a way forward.
My personal view is that the best way to do this would for the support for the Green School to come in the form of a loan rather than a grant. And that would ensure that the money is paid back in full.
Greens co-leader James Shaw. Australia's Treasurer has hit back at Facebook's warning that it could ban Australian news content, saying he won't respond to threats. The US tech giant says it will be left with no choice but to cut news from Facebook and Instagram if an attempt to govern how media companies deal with big tech becomes law. The so-called News Bargaining Code follows years of complaints that Google and Facebook benefit from having news content without sharing any revenue with the media. Josh Frydenberg says he won't be cowed by heavy-handed threats. It's coming up to 4.5 minutes past 5. In sport, New Zealand basketballer Stephen Adams' Oklahoma City Thunder have kept their NBA title hopes alive with a 104-100 win over the Houston Rockets in Game 6 of the first round Western Conference playoffs. The win levels the best of 7 series at 3 games all, with the winner advancing to play the Los Angeles Lakers in the conference semi-finals. In the first round of the Eastern Conference semis, Miami Heat had a 115-10 win over the Milwaukee Bucks. World number one Novak Djokovic has got his campaign to win a fourth US Tennis Open and 18th Grand Slam title off to a flying start. Djokovic beat Damir Djumhur in straight sets to advance to the second round, with the two other members of the sport's big three, Roger Federer and Rafa Nadal, not playing at the tournament. Djokovic is a heavy favourite to hoist the trophy. A win would put him within one Grand Slam title of Nadal, who sits on 19, and within two of Federer on 20. Former champion Naomi Osaka had a big deep to beat fellow Japanese player Misaki Doi in straight sets, while American teenager Coco Gauff's hopes of another dream Grand Slam run were ended when she lost in the first round. The former All Black Adam Thompson has signed to play for Waikato in the upcoming Mitre 10 Cup competition. 38-year-old loose forward played for the Chiefs in Super Rugby Aotearoa this season, chalking up a century of Super Rugby matches. That's the news.
Toxic danger in Southland.
It's been a year from hell in many ways, to be honest, for the people in Tara. I haven't got much hair left, but I've lost a bit this year.
Fire danger at Lake Pukaki.
Too early to say under control. It's a big area that's covered. It's never going to be possible to extinguish.
And dangerous ideas.
You're putting money towards a building project that seems to be something where they teach what amounts to conspiracy theories.
Well, there are people in the community that do believe those things and they're wrong.
Helping you navigate 2020. Morning reports weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. The northern part of North Island from Taumaranui and Taupo northwards, including Bay of Plenty. A few showers turning to rain for a time tonight. Possible thunderstorms about western Northland and Auckland later tomorrow. Taranaki and Taihape to Kapiti, periods of rain or showers. Snow to 800 metres about central high country for a time tomorrow, then clearing later in the day. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a few showers tonight, period of rain tomorrow afternoon and evening. Wairarapa and Wellington, periods of rain, easing to a few showers late tomorrow morning. For Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and Canterbury, periods of rain with snow to 400 metres in Canterbury and southern Marlborough and 800 metres elsewhere, clearing tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers with snow to 300 metres, clearing by the evening. Fine weather tomorrow with morning frosts. Chatham Islands, occasional rain developing tonight. RNZ National, coming up to 7.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Coming up on the program, why EQC is still getting 450 re-repair cases a month, a decade on from the Canterbury quakes. But we begin tonight with Sam Morgan. The entrepreneur has walked away from the $100 million COVID card project, saying he's sick of the bureaucracy and lack of will by the Health Ministry. But the government's hit back, saying it doesn't need him anyway. The card uses Bluetooth technology to help with more efficient mass contact tracing and is due to be trialled in Rotorua this month. The government insists those plans have not been derailed by the departure of the Trade Me founder and his crack team of tech experts. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
With the trial just a few weeks away, tech entrepreneur Sam Morgan says he doesn't see how the card can successfully go ahead without his team. He says they've written the software, procured the card design and organised a factory to make them in China. But the Digital Technology Minister Chris Farfoy says Mr Morgan is not the only brains behind it.
He's not. There's a whole lot of other people that are part of the PPP that have stuck around as part of the trial in Rotorua as well. I know Sam's frustrated. I can't control Sam's feelings on a day-to-day basis, but we're committed to making sure that we have a trial in Rotorua, and that's what we'll be doing.
Mr Morgan, who wouldn't be interviewed on air, says he's frustrated with the government response as it decides whether to go ahead with the card, saying it's been bogged down by bureaucracy and Ministry of Health middle management. The Minister in charge of Managed Isolation and Quarantine, Megan Woods, says her team had a meeting this week about what impact losing Mr Morgan's team would have on a separate trial in isolation hotels.
And the answer is absolutely none. We're still in a position to keep working through that, and we're still working through where that trial will be. We have a couple of contenders of isolation facilities where it will be useful as a tool to be able to track contacts within a facility.
The COVID card can be worn or carried by people and would send and receive digital signals to and from other cards around it. That data would then be used to identify those who may have been close enough to someone with COVID to mean they were also at risk. It would remove the need for people to have to remember or bother to use their COVID Tracer app. Ms Woods says for the managed isolation trial, they're also going to see if it can work for places as well as people.
How could we utilise this technology so we'd know who was in a given lift? So is it that we can actually place COVID cards in particular hot points within our facilities and then see what interactions returnees have with those?
Mr Morgan says he doesn't own the COVID card tech, but says the ministry's own IT people don't have the skills to get it off the ground. ACT's David Seymour is a fan of the card, pointing out, as many epidemiologists do, that mass rapid contact tracing tech could help prevent lockdowns.
This government can't cooperate even when well-talented entrepreneurs want to work with them. How are they supposed to collaborate with people who don't want to work with them when they can't even get help from people that are trying to help?
Health Minister Chris Hipkins said yesterday that the government was also considering using Apple and Google data. Mr Morgan says he's frustrated to hear that, saying the tech giants won't let governments be directly involved with communicating the data, and it's too broad and inaccurate to work. But Mr Farfoy says overseas solutions have improved over time and everything must be considered. He says he understands that Mr Morgan's frustrated by the government's reluctance to commit immediately to the card, but it must be put through its paces before a decision's made.
We want to make sure that if we're making a decision, it's based on the fact that we know that the card will work. We know how the community will respond to wearing a lanyard right around the country. And as we've already seen, there are some other instances where it might be useful other than an initial rollout. But until we go through a trial, spending hundreds of millions of New Zealand's taxpayers' dollars is not a wise thing to do before we know it definitely works.
Mr Farfoy says he felt the government had a good relationship with Mr Morgan. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi ko Rowan Quinn DNA.
Celebrated innovator Ian Taylor has been in talks with Sam Morgan since the COVID card's inception. He believes the card could avert future lockdowns, but its development is being hampered by ministers out of their depth. And he says he has some frank words for Chris Farfoy in particular. Taylor says he understands Morgan's frustration, but he is urging him not to walk away.
I'd dearly like to try and talk him out of it. You know, I mean, the efforts that he has put in and the solution he's come up with is one I think is just way too important to let fall off the radar, really.
With the greatest of respect, why do we need him to execute the project?
I remember the first time I even heard about it was way back in April when Sam sent me an email. One, he said, look, you guys know about apps. Do you agree that an app isn't the solution for this? And we did, I did entirely. But what really impressed me was where he was coming from. He was looking way out. He said to me, we will go through this lockdown, we will flatten this curve, we will come out, but we will go back again unless we have the tools to deal with it. And then he said, and the tools, we can't be relying on cell phones and apps and things like that because they ignore the most vulnerable. We have to find a tool that everybody can use. Nobody has to have any expertise to use it, and it is free to everyone. And that resonated with me immediately. And basically, he was describing the COVID card. And, as I've seen the way this is rolled out, and I understand Sam's frustration. I mean, I've been a witness on the edge of it, of just the way the thing has gone around and round in circles. This was a decision that needed to be made really early. I heard Minister Farfoy the other day. So, that was April. So, 5 months, whatever it is. Minister Farfoy said the other day that it's a number of things we're looking at. I don't imagine I'll put anything in front of Cabinet before the end of the year. Well, my image immediately was Nero fiddling while Rome burned. And my message to Farfoy is we are on fire and we need to stop fiddling.
So explain to me the frustration. Why do you think it has come to this?
I think we need to put it in context. I mean, this is a situation that, we really have never experienced anywhere before. I mean, this is a virus that is surprising us every day. So, you need to be able to act and respond really fast. And, I think some great things have been done. COVID, the close contact tracing team are doing a remarkable job, but we aren't giving them the very best tools to use. So if I was being frank, governments and government departments are not equipped to deal with an emergency as big as this that needs response as fast as it does. And we're seeing that.
So why is that? Are you trying to say diplomatically too much bureaucracy?
Well, it's not too much bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is bureaucracy. And, when you hit a situation like this, you need to be able to cut through all of that. And, I can give you a really good example of the kind of thinking that happened. And, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, that's a bureaucracy. When we needed something to happen really fast for COVID, they approached us and they approved something in less than a week because they liked the idea. Now, there are people in there who can, inside bureaucracies, who perhaps can do this. But if you looked out and saw what Sam and his team had done, and, I looked in from the outside initially, I have no idea why people are treating Sam the way they did and why Minister Farfoy seemed to dismiss Sam today as being sort of petulant and having one of his day problems. Minister Farfoy and those ministers, if they can't respond fast and quickly enough, they need to step aside.
Okay, this is what Chris Farfoy says. If you are spending $100 million, which is what they are telling us it will cost to roll this card out, it needs to be tried and tested. And he is not going to put that to one side and rush something through when he is spending that much money. Does he have a point?
No, he doesn't. He doesn't have a point at all. Auckland was losing $76 million a day. In the time that level 3 was on, we're talking about $2 billion. And he's happy to spend $2 billion, not happy to go back and ask the question, if everybody was wearing a COVID card 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, how fast would we have found all of the contacts? Not just the contacts that the person could remember, but the contacts that they couldn't remember. Now, my prediction from the COVID card is where the Prime Minister at 9:15, the first test was found at 2:30 in the afternoon. At 9:15, all she could tell us was that 4 people had it. At 9:15, if everyone had been using the COVID card, they may well have even tracked the source of it. They certainly would have tracked all 3 weeks of everybody who had the COVID card in contact. Now, if Minister Farfoy thinks paying $100 million to keep Auckland out of level 4 for the past 3 weeks is a risk, then the other risk he's taken has just cost us way more. And to put that $100 million in context, there are off-ramps all the way along it. You could be spending $10 million, say, and this is to buy all the cards and to make sure every New Zealander has got one. It's buying this asset, and if they had that in place, one of the things they designed was a whole lot of off-ramps. If a vaccine came, we'd only have spent this by this time. But if they said, let's spend $10 million and make sure this goes into every isolation unit now, it's compulsory for everyone to wear, compulsory for anyone who works there, compulsory for anyone who goes in there. You need maybe, 15,000 cards. You order those, fly them in, get them on, and now you're testing it in a real-life situation where we know there is risk. Taking it over to Rotorua and spending $1 million seeing if people feel happy about wearing a card around their neck is just ludicrous. Actually, I did have to step back. I promised myself I wouldn't get angry. I was going to be really reasonable. I'll tell you what frustrates me most. I have got 3 moko from the age of 2 down to the age of 7 weeks. What is happening in our country, by the thing that caught us by surprise, it's no blame. Nobody's blamed for this. But the way we respond to this is going to impact our mokopuna for a long time. We talk about a generation that came out of depression. We talk about the generations that came out of the First and Second World War. There will be a generation coming out of this. And if Minister Farfoy wants to sit around fiddling, then he really needs to be moved aside. This is about our mokopuna.
So bottom line, who or what's the problem here in a sentence or less? Ian, sum it up for us.
I think probably the problem is that, bureaucracies are overwhelmed. They are not designed to move at the speed that this virus is moving.
And that was Ian Taylor of Animation Research Limited in Dunedin. And we've just got a statement in from the Ministry of Health. It's attributed to Shane Hunter, the Deputy Director General of Data and Digital. It says the Ministry of Health continues to work with interested individuals from the Public-Private Partnership Group to investigate the feasibility of a Bluetooth-enabled COVID card as part of a suite of technology solutions helping New Zealand tackle COVID-19. The statement goes on to say the next stage involves a trial of the card in Rotorua later this month, which will determine the COVID card's value for contact tracing and to assess its use in real-life scenarios. It says that this is just one effective tool in a suite of tools, basically. For example, the New Zealand COVID Tracer app now has more than 2 million registered users, representing about 50% of the population aged 15 and over. More than 1.7 million scans are being done each day, the statement says. That's interesting. 2 million registered users, but only 1.7 million scans a day. OK, let us know your thoughts on that. It is almost 21 minutes past 5. Sam Morgan has walked away from this project. Wow. Government says we don't need him. Do we? Would you be happy to wear a COVID card? Should we be going to this trial or just cracking on? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A decade on from the Christchurch quakes, more than 400 cases of botched repairs needing a fix are still flooding into EQC each month. The government yesterday accepted 70 recommendations made in a highly critical report into the Earthquake Commission. The inquiry found EQC was ill-prepared to deal with the widespread damage of the quakes and to handle a mass-scale managed repair program, leading to multiple mistakes and inadequate quality control. And the Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Megan Woods, told Checkpoint yesterday, as soon as EQC clears cases, more come in. EQC CEO Sid Miller told me all 1,559 cases still open and on their books are re-repairs.
The situation we're in, Lisa, is the amount of reopened claims that we get on a monthly basis. We're currently tracking around about 450 a month. So of those, they range in claims that are sort of, I'll class as, say, low complexity, medium or high. If they're high complexity claims, they can take sort of 10 to 12 months to resolve. The medium, sort of 4 to 5 months, and then the low complexity, about a month. So what that means is you end up with, on the basis of what's coming in all the time, you end up with a sort of an equilibrium number of claims on the books, which we think somewhere between a sort of 1,000 and 1,200.
Sorry, Sid, you can't get below that number. Basically, you're stuck. You're running to stand still.
Yes, that's correct. Well, that's correct, except for we've got about 300 that are greater than 12 months, of which about 105 of those are in litigation, and the others. So we're focusing, a huge amount of effort into those claims and working, very closely with GCCRS on a lot of those claims. So I believe we can get those down, but the others, the sort of 1,000 to 1,200 is an equilibrium position at the minute.
So you mentioned 450 a month coming back to you. How long have you been experiencing that kind of bounce back for re-repairs?
The number has dropped. It was sort of a couple of years ago was sort of 750, something around that, and then dropped to around about 600, and it's now about 450. So it has dropped, but it's only dropping slowly.
What percentage of the cases fall into that complex category that you described?
I'd have to get you the exact figures, but I think, I believe it'll be somewhere around about 10%, maybe less than that.
And what kind of repairs are we talking about here that are needed?
They would be significant repairs related to invariably missed damage, which tend to be structural or could be foundation damage.
And across the board, would foundations be one of the main issues with re-repairs?
No, it's one of the issues. The majority of our claims are in the lower complex area, and so a lot of that is more superficial damage. And we have, in the medium complex can again be some structural damage. So foundation is just one of many different types of damage that we're dealing with.
So how long is it going to take you to resolve all of these?
Look, Lisa, all we can do is keep addressing the reopened claims that come in, and that's what we're focused on doing. I can't give you a projection when the last claim will come in, and therefore extrapolating that when we would have them all resolved. I just can't give you that figure. All I can say is that we keep going to address all the reopened claims.
110 cases still going through the court. Why so many?
Well, we've made a lot of inroads into that space. I think when we talked a couple of years ago, we had a very much a focus on the claims in litigation, and we've reduced them from 400 to 105. So that's a significant reduction. And we keep working on those in terms of trying to find different settlement paths. Obviously, it takes two parties to agree to discontinue, but we're doing everything that we can, both with our settlement specialists and also with GCCRS and the tribunal to try and get those resolved.
So how much have you spent on litigation and legal fees?
Yeah, I think the total figure over about 10 years is around about 50 million, just over 50 million.
So why not save everybody some money and heartache and just pay up on some of these claims that are dragging on? Because what is the cost benefit to, dragging it out through court?
Absolutely, and that's where we've had such a strong focus on this. And I'm pleased to say that we've reduced that number by 300 over the last couple of years, and we remain very focused on these remaining ones and trying to seek a settlement pathway. Obviously working with the customer themselves and whoever their legal representatives are as to how we can find a solution. So we're doing everything.
But can't you find a solution, Sid? And I don't mean to oversimplify this, but can't you find a solution by saying, okay, we agree we're not being as generous as we should. We agree that your engineers or experts are correct, and we will pay. That's the solution, isn't it?
It is, as long as that's the other side are agreeable to that. So we are seeking, when we try and find these settlements, all ways to get breakthroughs. But sometimes, people's expectations are far greater than that. And we only have so much room to move within the Act. So, we've got to keep working with GCCRS. They provide an invaluable service in this space to try and seek that solution. And I agree with you, Lisa. There's got to be a pathway somewhere, and that's what we keep pursuing to try and find it.
Does the EQC want to be the lead agency for any future managed repair program? Project managers, in essence. Do you want that job? Should it come up again?
I think that is something that the government is looking at from a repair program. We certainly, I think it was well documented in the inquiry report. We didn't have that capability. And we don't have that capability, today in terms of, having gone through that repair program.
So you shouldn't be the leads then if you don't have that capability right now.
No, and it's something that for the government, and I know they're looking at across multiple agencies as to how that can be addressed in the future.
But to be clear, Sid, you don't want that job in the future. You wouldn't want it.
We don't have that capability today, so no, I don't. And what decision the government makes coming out of this, I don't know. We will support that as we can in terms of the knowledge and experience we've gained. But I think there was very clear messaging in the inquiry that this is a major issue that needs to be addressed.
So you'd rule yourselves out if you could.
Lisa, that's a decision for the government to
understand that, but I'm asking you your position here. You would like to rule yourselves out of that job.
Oh, look, if the government says that it's got to be EQC, then I think there is a major piece of work that EQC would have to do to build the capability to be in a position where it was capable of undertaking that work, and that is a completely different set of skills and capabilities and systems that we have today, or the organisation had 10 years ago. It's not a... the government will make that decision, but the work that needs to be done to build that capability is significant, and we don't have that capability today.
That is EQC CEO Sid Miller. Greens co-leader James Shaw has fronted up with a massive mea culpa over the Green School fiasco, but no solution. One may be on the horizon, though, with the school breaking its silence to tell RNZ it is open to much of the nearly $12 million it was promised being treated as a loan. RNZ can also reveal one of the major reasons Treasury opposed the initial decision. The school has yet to be fully registered. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Hello and welcome.
The Green School has brought no calm to the Green Party in recent days, nothing but a headache. Last month it hosted a so-called abundance and manifestation ceremony run by a couple who believe COVID-19 is a manufactured disaster.
Find some sacred space.
Christoph Melchizedek calls himself a new age architect. A school parent had planned a crystal planting on the grounds this year with students and visiting tourists.
This new age school, this new consciousness school that's coming and going to be birthed in this country and of course around the world.
I've certainly found that in New Plymouth there's possibly not a huge amount of support for growing crystals.
The opposition's revelling in the latest revelations, just fuel on the fire. Public schools, teachers, unions and the Greens' own supporters are furious at the taxpayer money raining down on the Green School. The private institution was awarded nearly $12 million out of the COVID-19 war chest designated for shovel-ready projects.
The decision that I made to support this project was an error of judgment for which I apologise. If I was making the same decision again, I would not support the project.
James Shaw was the project's chief cheerleader and one of the only ones. RNZ has obtained Treasury documents which show it advised against funding the school expansion and says the school has yet to receive its full registration and as such should not be given taxpayer funding.
Treasury went in another direction on this project.
Mr Shaw's now wishing he'd done the same. He'd hoped to unveil a grand solution today. Instead, he could offer only hope.
My personal view is that the best way to do this would for the support for the Green School to come in the form of a loan rather than a grant. And that would ensure that the money is paid back in full.
But Mr Shaw can't force that move, with an announcement already made and negotiations with the school in swing. Fortunately for him, the Green School seems favourable to his idea. The Chief Executive, Chris Edwards, told RNZ a chunk of the funding was always going to be treated as a loan. He understands it will now be the vast majority.
I do know there are conversations going on now to see if we can use the funds in as creative a manner as possible that will benefit the community.
He says the school's been misrepresented. It's hosted numerous events, he says, and those involving crystals or bioenergy field cleaning should not be conflated with the curriculum.
It doesn't reflect the views necessarily of the school. Many people use this campus.
The school sees itself as another victim of the controversy, its reputation taking a battering in recent days.
If ever there was a political football, it's Green School. People were congratulating us only a few days ago who are now saying it's an outrageous decision and should never have happened.
The Greens are hurting too. For them, this could not have come at a worse time, just weeks out from an election and hovering around that crucial 5% threshold, its hold on Parliament. Co-leader Marama Davidson says they're desperate to put it right.
This was a mistake. We are apologising and we hope to see a solution as well.
I feel terrible about the way that this has played out.
The sooner a solution, the sooner he might find peace of mind.
Start by taking 3 deep breaths.
From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Coming up on Checkpoint. Checkpoint on RNZ National. The boss of the Volunteer Firefighters Association has been suspended while allegations of bullying and harassment are investigated. A grieving woman's plea over the upcoming euthanasia referendum, and a year on from breaking his back, a New Zealand mountain biker heads overseas with hopes of competing at October's World Champs. We'd love your feedback on the Green School, on the COVID card and Sam Morgan walking away from that project, or if you're still waiting for repairs through EQC, we would love to hear from you. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go now to Susanna with the headlines.
A celebrated innovator says Sam Morgan and his team are necessary to help the COVID card become a reality. The businessman and his team have pulled out of the project, saying it's become mired in government bureaucracy. Ian Taylor, who's been in talks with Mr Morgan since the card's inception, told Checkpoint Mr Morgan's solution is way too important to be let fall off the radar. The government says a COVID card trial will go ahead next month regardless. A man working at an isolation facility likely caught COVID-19 by using a lift minutes after a guest who later tested positive for the same strain. The minister in charge of managed isolation, Megan Woods, says the case is now closed and there is a new directive in place to make sure hand sanitizer is used every time someone goes into a lift. The head of the Earthquake Commission says they've received about 450 reopened claims every month. The government yesterday accepted 70 recommendations made in a highly critical report, which found the EQC was ill-prepared to deal with the widespread damage of the quakes or to handle a mass-scale repair program. Sid Miller told Checkpoint some claims can take up to 12 months to resolve and they're in an equilibrium position. It's now a criminal offence to financially support the Christchurch gunman. The Deputy Prime Minister says designating Brenton Tarrant as a terrorist entity helps deny what he and his support base believe in. Tarrant is the first individual in the country to be given such a designation, which means his assets are also frozen. The Chief Executive of the United Fire Brigades Association has been suspended, while allegations of bullying and sexual harassment dating back several years are investigated by an independent lawyer. Fire and Emergency says one complaint against Bill Bootspark was examined by another independent investigation in 2016. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and it's time now for the business news with Nicholas Poynton. OK, Nicholas, let's start with Kiwi Bank. So full year financial results, what impact did the pandemic have?
Well, I think the fact that the bank has effectively set aside half of its profit, about $51 million, to cover bad debts on its books sort of really says it all, really. The bank is really erring on the side of caution. It says that to date its losses have been relatively low, but it is expecting sort of an uptick on people defaulting on their debt when the worst effects of the pandemic begin to set in. So the bank's full year profit for the year was $57 million. Compare that with last year. They had a nice profit of about $108 million. It says trading has been a little bit affected by some increased costs. They've sort of looked to invest in growth and improving sort of customer outcomes and the like. But their profits probably haven't also been helped too much by some of these OCR measures taken by the Reserve Bank, because as interest rates drop, it effectively kind of cuts into the rates, the margins for these retail banks. But there are some positive signs for the bank. Chief among them is the fact that their lending growth was actually up 9% on last year. And if you compare that with sort of the average growth rate across all the other retail banks, which is at 5%, it's sort of about a 4-point increase, which is, quite a difference. But the $1 million question is whether or not this lending will continue throughout the current financial year, because that's something that the Reserve Bank has signalled to the retail banks. They want them to all keep their foot on the gas. They say, look, we've pulled out all the tools in our toolbox to, keep interest rates low to support the economy, but it's really on you guys to, keep the work up and keep lending. So there'll be a lot of attention really paid to this bank and many other banks' sort of quarterly updates to see how is lending tracking on since that we first saw signs of the pandemic in early March.
And that's scary to think they've put aside such a significant amount of money to cover off bad debt.
It is a bit of an increase. It's a substantial increase on last year by about $12 million. ANZ, they put out their third quarter results not too long ago. They also reported a significant increase, and they call them impairment costs, money that they've set aside for this. But yeah, it is, in a way, isn't too surprising, really.
No.
You would expect to see more defaults across the board.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's now move on to this Taranaki-based energy company who's got a partnership going on with a hydrogen vehicle company, and they're going to bring in trucks to New Zealand. So what are the details?
Yeah, this is pretty exciting stuff. This is Haringa Energy, and they've partnered with this US-based hydrogen vehicle manufacturer called Hyzon Motors, and the plan is to bring hydrogen-powered trucks, so think hydrogen fuel cells, to New Zealand next year. The first batch, they say they're going to bring about 20 over, hopefully, and then they'll do some tests, make sure that they're fit for purpose. For New Zealand's got quite a demanding road network, as you can probably imagine. But by 2026, they expect to have 1,500 of these trucks in New Zealand operating. And this is some really big news for Haringa Energy, because hydrogen energy, that's something that they've been really big on for several years now. And one of the things that they've said that they've wanted to do is bring hydrogen vehicles to New Zealand. Back in 2018, they said that by 2020 would have these vehicles. Well, that hasn't actually materialised, so it will be interesting to see if they can really pull this off next year. And I think one of the really exciting things is the fact that, look, this could be a really big step towards significantly decarbonising our freight fleet. But a lot of work needs to happen before we see those first trucks come to New Zealand. The fact is that currently there are no hydrogen filling stations in New Zealand. So Haringa, they say their first step is that they're going to build 4 filling stations. They're going to pair up with Waitomo, the fuel retailer, to do that. By 2022, they'll have another 4, so they'll bring the total to 8. And they say that if they hit that target of 8, they will be able to cover 95% of the freight routes in New Zealand, which is a goal that they're going to have to hit if they want to sort of really challenge the diesel fuel trucks in the market. These trucks, though, they are a little bit more expensive than their diesel counterparts. When I say a little bit, maybe quite a bit, about 25 to 30% more expensive.
Right, okay.
Haringa says if they're going to really reduce those costs, it will come down to an economy of scale. They'll need to have more trucks be bringing more trucks in, and they're also going to have to really ramp up the production of hydrogen to sort of help really pull those costs down. At the moment, these trucks, when they're brought over, Haringa, they've had a bit of a partnership with the TR Group, which is a big logistics company. They're going to take ownership of those first 20 trucks, and then they will on-lease them to sort of these trucking operators. So look, all in all, they say 2022. That is the date when we will start to see those first commercial use of these hydrogen-powered trucks on New Zealand roads. So
okay.
Hopefully in 2 years' time we'll be here to talk about it. Who knows?
Interesting. Hey, so let's go to the markets today and what happened there. I'm taking it that it was uninterrupted trading today.
Yeah, we managed. The NZX has held up. Look, it has been patchy here and there, but we haven't seen any significant outages. So, trading has continued. The NZX, though, today has actually really fallen over the course of the day. It's down by 1.21%, which is about 144 points to 11,793. But that's because it's our NZX, our share market, follows the ASX, which has actually fallen to about a 4-week low. And that's just a lot of investors now are waiting to see what sort of actions the Australian Central Bank is going to take over there. Our dollar is up by a third to 67.6 US cents. We're steady at 91.3 Australian and 50.4 British pence. And before I forget, gold is up a touch for the day at $1,986 an ounce.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with our business update. It could take months to fully extinguish a scrub fire in the Mackenzie district, even though it's hiding under a blanket of snow right now. The fire has ripped through more than 3,000 hectares of mostly wilding pines near Twizel since Sunday. The Civil Defence Minister, Pene Henare, flew in today to assess the damage and speak to the people affected. Video journalist Nathan McKinnon and reporter Tess Brunton are in Twizel and filed this story.
For the past 2 days, flames have scorched the earth, ripping through wilding pines near the popular tourist attraction Lake Pukaki. But overnight, a southerly change turned the region white, with the poor conditions forcing helicopters to stay on the ground. Twizel Fire Station Deputy Chief Fire Officer Ian Gardner was staying overnight to protect properties as the snow and heavy rain hit the area.
We could see the front, there were some big flare-ups before that, quite significant ones, raining ash around us, but yeah, it was quite dramatic, the change in weather.
3 crews from Timaru, Ashburton and Twizel held their overnight vigil to protect at least 20 buildings, including accommodation and cottages. One homestead has been destroyed, along with some smaller outbuildings, but most have been protected from the flames.
At the start of the shift, there was still lots of flare-ups. The whole hillside in the mountains was pretty much on fire. You probably got footage of that maybe from last night. And then as soon as the front came through, everything just started to die right down. Humidity went right up, so fire behaviour just really settled. And then it started to rain, probably about 11 o'clock. By 12 it was quite heavy, and then by 4 o'clock it started to snow.
Ian Gardner was relieved to see the front move over and crews heading home. He says the community has been incredibly supportive.
Oh, it's been great, you know, the community have been offering their support, been dropping food off at the station. Lots of moral support. It's been great.
Earlier today, the highway to Aoraki Mount Cook was reopened. Civil Defence Minister Penny Henare travelled along the road to check the damage, but it wasn't quite what he expected.
I came here to see a fire and now I see a winter wonderland, and it belies what actually took place here yesterday, which is really surprising. The footage that I've seen, the discussions that I've had, paints a very different picture, but obviously it's what we can't see that's the issue, which is why the assessment as soon as possible needs to be made about the state of the fire.
He met with some of the people affected.
A number of them have lost and have property that's damaged. There is, in our discussions, anxiety and really they're unsure about what the future holds for them. But I know that the good communication from the Mayor's office and also the work that Rob and his team are doing are helping them, one, to get back to their property in the first instance, and two, how we might support them into the future.
No support funding was announced. The Minister says the focus is on the fire and he expects to hear more about what the community needs over the coming days. Instead, Penny Henare referred to previous funding to help clear the wilding pines. Funding Mackenzie District Mayor Graham Smith acknowledged but said more was needed.
Those properties that made a real intention to keep the vegetation well away from their frontages actually helped themselves. And so around Twizel here we have areas where there's trees. We need to be more proactive in actually making sure that vegetation is not in a position where it can explode and cause property damage.
Thick snow blankets the area with the smell of ash hanging in the air. Instead of flames, smoke rises from blackened branches. About 15 firefighters were in the field today, using heavy machinery to create control lines. Fire and Emergency Incident Controller Rob Hand says the fire is hidden, but it's still active and could stay that way for 3 months.
The fire's sitting there under a cover of snow. It's not going to go running anywhere. There'll be smouldering heaps with heavy fuel loads in different areas, and that's something the public shouldn't be concerned about. It's not going to go running towards any property. We've done site assessments on all those properties, and we wouldn't be letting the public back into them without confidence that they are safe.
Rob Hand says they're working to develop a plan and expected to be more actively fighting the fire on Thursday and Friday. While the fire is expected to linger for months, Graham Smith says the Mackenzie remains ready to welcome visitors. In Twizel for Checkpoint, Ko Tess Brunton, TNA.
And if you're listening to that one on radio, we'll put Tess and Nathan's piece on our Facebook page. Some amazing pictures there of the snow pouring down with the fire still going underneath. Some beneficiaries are about to lose more than $60 from their weekly pay, despite demand for food banks and emergency assistance being at record levels. The government doubled the winter energy payment this year to soften COVID-19's economic hit, but it will run out on the 1st of October. Beneficiaries and welfare advocates say the costs and stresses of COVID aren't going anywhere in just a month's time and are urging the government not to cut the extra payment. Our cameraman Simon Rogers and reporter Nita Blake-Person filed this piece.
For Otara woman Agnes, grocery shopping can be a stressful time.
Honestly, I hate shopping. It sucks that you have to go and sort of buy all the second meats and second fruits and, vegetables and stuff. It's maybe once in my life it'll be nice to sort of buy, you know, some really, really flash-ass meat and some really expensive, you know, food in the supermarkets and stuff. But
Agnes and her 2 kids are supported through the job seeker benefit. Receiving double the winter energy payment over the past 4 months has boosted her income to $250 a week, but it's still not enough.
It's impossible for anybody, especially when you have a family with 2 or more children in it, sole parent with children, couples with children, especially our kaumatuas, our koros, our fires, and our elderly parents. It's just unrealistic.
She says an extension to the payment would be hugely helpful.
The ones that are always having to miss out are our kids, you know, so we want that to stop. The winter energy payment needs to be extended, especially with the COVID, the pandemic happening at the moment. The government, especially our Minister of Finance and our Minister of Social Development, should see the struggles that everybody is living in at the moment and start giving a damn, you know, about us and the people.
The Child Poverty Action Group and Auckland Action Against Poverty are both backing Agnes's call.
It was doubled this year, not because of winter energy, but because of COVID. The cost of living is a deep concern, and this payment goes a little way to helping our most financially vulnerable.
Child Poverty Action Group researcher Janet McAllister has been crunching the numbers around how different households will be affected come October 1st. Incomes for all households receiving benefits and or superannuation will drop by $63 a week for families and couples and $41 a week for single adults. And for context, the weekly income for a sole parent with 1 child renting in a low-income suburb in Auckland is currently $25 below the poverty line. Next month, that will drop to $90.
Most of our most financially vulnerable families with children, they already don't have enough money. And come the 1st of October, their income is going to fall off a cliff. $63 a week for families with children who have very little is a massive amount to be missing.
Lengthy queues at food banks in recent times reveal some of the huge struggles families face. The number of beneficiaries rose by 12% in April, the biggest jump in 24 years. The chair of the government's own welfare expert advisory group, Cindy Kiro, says the welfare system simply isn't working.
I don't think there can be any doubt that when people are so desperate, when they're prepared to almost sacrifice their dignity to go and stand in a queue for hours to get food to feed themselves and their family, there's something wrong.
She says boosting the winter energy payment isn't the complete answer, but it's a start.
Whatever justification you want to use to pay people who desperately need more money is fine by me. You can call it a COVID wage extension, you can call it a COVID hardship extension, you can call it a winter payment, I don't care what you call it. But the justification really is to be able to put people who are in a period of hardship in a really difficult period until some of the other policy settings can be sorted out, to give them a bit of a boost.
However, Social Development Minister Carmel Sepuloni says there are no plans to keep that money going.
Not the only measure that we've taken as a government. There was a huge investment, over $5 billion with the families package. We this year have indexed benefits to wages, which will see them increase, which has seen them increase. We did increase benefits. We introduced the Best Start payment and a range of other things. So when you look at some of the scenarios, perhaps even just looking at sole parents on benefit, compared to when we got into government, sole parents, about 85,000 sole parents are on average about $101 better off than what they were when we first took office. So there have been improvements across the board as part of our overhaul.
But Agnes says that's not enough and is warning that the dire need for the basics will only get worse in a month's time.
If they think things are bad now with people asking for emergency assistance such as food grants and also people getting assistance from food banks, they think it's hard now. Imagine what it's going to be like when the winter energy payment stops.
For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
And again, if you were listening to that on radio, we'll put the video from Nita and Simon's piece up on our Facebook page. It is 7 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A woman whose terminally ill husband chose suicide over a prolonged, painful death is urging New Zealanders to allow people the option to die die with dignity. The public will be asked to vote yes or no to the End of Life Choice Act 2019, coming into force at this year's October 17 referendum. The Act will allow terminally ill people given 6 months to live and experiencing unbearable suffering the option of medically assisted dying. Eva Corlett has this story and a warning: its content may disturb some people.
He looked after himself, but just in the last year of his life, in 2014, the tumour exudes hormone and it damaged his heart.
This is Heather Gregory speaking about Richard, her husband of nearly 30 years.
We knew it could happen, and we were monitoring it, but when it happened it was very sudden and very severe. So basically he was suffering heart failure, so he wasn't getting enough oxygen and his body was breaking down.
The father to their 5 children was diagnosed with carcinoid cancer at 58 years old.
He felt he was losing control, and on the day he decided to end it all, he'd been sitting on the sofa just over there in the sun. It was actually this time of year. He died at the end of this month. And he had a nap in the sun, and when he went to push himself up, he couldn't. He wasn't strong enough.
On that night in 2014, Heather went off to her quiz night in her hometown of Hastings. While she was out that night, her husband took his own life. The fallout from Richard's suicide was distressing.
It was a devastating end to a very good life, and it could have been so much better.
It wasn't the end she and their 5 children had hoped for.
And we got the double whammy. We got the long ending, and then the sudden death. I thought we'd be sitting around a bed and talking about things.
Heather says Richard's suffering was unbearable and there was little that could be done to truly relieve it. She says if euthanasia had been an option, he would have taken it.
If this had been in place, it would have just changed the whole dynamics of the whole situation leading up to it and the final moments and the time afterwards.
Heather says the public has a very medically assisted life and that should be extended to a medically assisted death.
It's not going to cause extra people to die because these people are dying anyway, but the manner of their death will be just so much more supportive, compassionate, kind.
RNZ will continue its coverage of euthanasia in the lead up to the new referendum date, October 17th. Next week, we'll bring you a story from someone on the other side of the debate. To learn more about the referendum, go to rnz.co.nz and click on the End of Life Choice tab. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Eva Corlett tēnei.
President Trump seems determined to make law and order the centrepiece of his presidential campaign. He says only he can quell the unrest sparked by demonstrators against racial inequality and police brutality. But as his rival Joe Biden argues, this unrest started and has escalated under his watch. With more, here's the BBC's Nick Bryant.
The doorstep of the White House last night. Canisters of tear gas fired almost within sniffing distance of the president. And in this fog of ongoing protest, Donald Trump sees a clear political opening, a comeback in the polls fueled by scenes of civil unrest. Law and order, he tweeted today, in what's fast becoming his re-election slogan. And he also attacked what he called the radical left mayors and governors of cities where this crazy violence is taking place, who've lost control of their movement. His tweets followed a weekend of violence in Portland, Oregon, where a white man was shot dead amid clashes between supporters of Donald Trump and anti-racist protesters. It also came in response to an attack on the president from Portland's Democratic mayor.
Do you seriously wonder, Mr. President, why this is the first time in decades that America has seen this level of violence? It's you who have created the hate and the division.
At the start of the summer, in the aftermath of George Floyd's death, Donald Trump's law and order credo didn't have the same cut-through. But since then, he's refined his message and seized upon the demand of Black Lives Matter protesters to defund the police, even though it's a policy that Joe Biden doesn't actually support.
Make no mistake, if you give power to Joe Biden, the radical left will defund police departments all across America.
Tonight, the former vice president delivered his rebuttal in a speech stressing that rioting was not protesting, and in which he claimed Donald Trump was a toxic presence poisoning America.
Fires are burning and we have a president who fans the flames rather than fighting the flames. But we must not burn. We have to build.
Donald Trump would much prefer to fight an election focused on civil unrest rather than the coronavirus outbreak. It's electoral terrain that historically has favoured the Republicans. The question is, has this summer of Black Lives Matter protest altered that political dynamic?
And that's the BBC's Nick Bryant. A lot of feedback coming in on the COVID card and Sam Morgan walking away from the project. Scott says anyone from the private sector who has done work with the government as a client or partner will understand Morgan and Taylor's exasperation. You will never encounter more inefficiency, incompetence, indifference and arrogance anywhere than in a government ministry. I'm incredibly disappointed that it seems to have been the same situation here.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. The government is defending the time it is taking to trial the COVID card as one of its primary backers walks away in frustration. The technology uses data to help with rapid contact tracing and is due to be trialled in Rotorua at the end of the month. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
The tech entrepreneur Sam Morgan says he and his team can no longer be involved because the government's taking too long to decide what to do with the card and the whole thing's become bogged down in bureaucracy. And he says he can't see how the government can get the app off the ground without their expertise. The Digital Services Minister Chris Farfoy says any tech solution will likely cost more than $100 million and needs to be trialled properly to see if it will work. Ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
Celebrated innovator Ian Taylor says the Digital Services Minister needs to ditch his cautious approach to the COVID card project. Mr Taylor says under Alert Level 3, Auckland loses more than $70 million a day and the government isn't moving fast enough. He has told Checkpoint that if Mr Farfoy can't speed up the card's introduction, he should step down as a project leader. The chief executive of the Taranaki Green School, which is at the centre of a storm over an almost $12 million handout to help it expand, says it was never meant to be a grant. Chris Edwards says it applied for the shovel-ready funding in good faith and is struggling with the backlash.
It was never, ever an $11.7 million grant. There was a small portion that was going to be the grant, and then the other elements were essentially loans.
Chris Edwards could not say whether the school's owners would be willing to give the money back. He says the Green School has become a political football and does not want to be seen as robbing funds from the public education sector. Mr Edwards says it's been hard hearing people who had supported the application now saying it was a mistake. Welfare advocates are urging the government to extend the winter energy payment to help beneficiaries cope with the fallout from COVID-19. The government doubled the payment, which is paid to all beneficiaries, as part of its COVID economic relief package. A study from the Child Poverty Action Group shows payments will drop by $63 a week for families and couples and $41 a week for single adults when the payment runs out next month. The government says it has no plans to extend the payment, but has put in place other measures, including raising base benefits by $25 a week. The Australian Treasurer has hit back at Facebook's warning that it could ban Australian news content on its platform, saying he won't respond to threats. The ABC's Matthew Duran has more.
The US tech giant says it will be left with no choice but to cut Australian news content from Facebook and Instagram if the Commonwealth presses ahead with its so-called news bargaining code. The legislation was developed by the ACCC to address the power imbalance between news outlets and social media companies after years of complaints. Organisations such as Google and Facebook benefit from having news content on their sites without sharing any revenue with the media. In a statement, Josh Frydenberg says Australia makes laws that advance the national interest and he won't be cowed by heavy-handed threats or coercion.
Matthew Doran reporting. The government says it's too soon to make decisions on support for the Mackenzie district in the wake of a large scrub fire. The blaze has burnt more than 3,000 hectares near Twizel since Sunday. The Civil Defence Minister Peeni Henare travelled to the region today to assess the damage and speak with the people affected. He confirmed no decision has been made yet out on government support to help the region.
We will continue to work with the Mayor's office to provide the support where we can. As the assessments are being done, for example, we met one property owner today who had no property affected other than the surroundings, where we've met another property owner who's had significant property damage and loss. So those assessments, I'm sure, will be underway, no doubt, in the coming days.
The Civil Defence Minister, Peeni Henare. It's coming up to 4.5 minutes past 6. World number one Novak Djokovic has got his campaign to win a 4th US Tennis Open and 18th Grand Slam title off to a flying start. Djokovic beat Damir Djumhur in straight sets to advance to the second round. With the two other members of the sport's big three, Roger Federer and Rafa Nadal, not playing at the tournament, Djokovic is a heavy favourite to win. Victory would see him close to within one Grand Slam title of Nadal, who sits on 19, and within 2 of Federer on 20. Meanwhile, Serena Williams is chasing her 24th Grand Slam singles title. A win would put her level with Margaret Court's all-time record, but also be her first in 3 years.
I'll never be satisfied until I retire. I'm never going to stop until I retire. That's just my personality. That's how I got to be here.
Serena Williams. Stephen Adams' Oklahoma City Thunder have kept their NBA title hopes alive with a 104-100 win over the Houston Rockets in Game 6 of the first round Western Conference playoffs. The win levels the best of 7 series at 3 games all. Adams scored 6 points, but more importantly had a game-high 14 rebounds. The decider is on Thursday. Cronulla centre Bronson Cherry's National Rugby League career is hanging by a thread after confirmation his B sample tested positive to anabolic steroids. The 19-year-old faces a 4-year ban and can either plead guilty or face the NRL's anti-doping tribunal to explain why he should not be banned.
Tonight on Nights, a window on the world of period poverty and the women who can't afford to buy sanitary pads or tampons. Fresh from waxing lyrical on the Kiwi lawn, John Bluck considers the impact of New Zealand cinema on New Zealanders. Trevor Reekie considers the musical impact of Paul Kelly, and Patrick Phelps from Minerals West Coast takes on the sensitive topic of mining on conservation land. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. The northern North Island from Taumaranui and Taupo northwards, including Bay of Plenty. A few showers turning to rain for a time tonight. Possible thunderstorms about western Northland and Auckland later tomorrow. Taranaki and Taihape to Kapiti, periods of rain or showers. Snow to 800 metres about central high country for a time tomorrow, then clearing later in the day. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a few showers tonight, a period of rain tomorrow afternoon and evening. Wairarapa and Wellington, periods of rain easing to a few showers late tomorrow morning. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and Canterbury, periods of rain, snow to 400 metres in Canterbury and southern Marlborough, and 800 metres elsewhere, clearing tomorrow. For Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers with snow to 300 metres, clearing by tonight. Fine weather tomorrow with morning frosts. And Chatham Islands, occasional rain developing tonight. RNZ National, coming up to 7.5 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The Chief Executive of the Volunteer Firefighters Association, Bill Butzbach, has been suspended while allegations of bullying and harassment are investigated. The complaints relate to incidents from several years ago and will now be the subject of an investigation by Christy McDonald QC. Her probe comes as Fire and Emergency faces mounting pressure over the way it handles complaints over sexual assault, harassment and bullying. Tony Sartorius is a senior firefighter with 22 years' experience. He's the founder of VolleyNet, which is the largest online community for volunteer firefighters. And Tony joins me now. Good evening, Tony. What is the feeling out there in the volunteer community around this issue?
Hi, Lisa. Well, I suppose it would be fair to say that everybody wishes it wasn't happening. But I can say that for the several people I know who have had behaviour like this occur to them and have made complaints, there's quite a lot of relief and excitement that finally it's seeing the light of day as an issue and that there's some public interest in getting it sorted out. It feels like progress, feels like momentum.
When you say several people, obviously there are 2 particular complaints that are being looked at. Do you think it goes way deeper than this?
I think within the organisation overall, yeah, absolutely. You know, there are as the NZPFU have said in the last few days, they have been reached out to by 10 to 12 people, and I think there's probably a lot more than that. You know, some of whom have complained, and some of whom just haven't complained because they haven't thought that it was worthwhile.
So, what do you think about the time frame it's taken to get to this point?
Mystifying. I can't understand it. I think that, you know, the board of the UFBA really have very important questions to answer about why, you know, today the investigation should start when, to the best of my knowledge, nothing's changed as far as they're concerned for several years, other than the fact that the media have taken an interest.
So is that why you think they're acting, that the pressure's going on them publicly, so they've got no choice?
I don't know. I mean, as far as I'm aware, no new evidence is. Well, I'm not aware of anything that's changed. So that seems to be the case. But you know, who knows? Perhaps they have other information that hasn't come out yet.
So just in terms of these complaints and the timing of them, they, as far as I understand, predate Bill Butzbach being appointed as the chief executive of the Firefighters Association. I mean, how did that happen with unresolved issues and complaints sitting there?
Well, I haven't been closely involved, but, you know, I think if that's true, yeah, absolutely, there's some very strange processes happen there and some deep questions that need to be asked.
So what do you think about the overall leadership being shown here?
Well, hopefully it's improving. There's been some really, I don't know, there's been almost like a blindness to this. It's been there, but it hasn't actually been resolved. And, you know, I think volunteer firefighters need better. They really do. Just, you know, we're not, I think, a group of people where this is something that happens more than other groups of people, but the resolution of these issues just seems to be take forever and not lead to justice a lot of the time somehow. It's just not working right. And for this to be happening in the organisation that we rely on to provide advocacy for the rest of us, should we find ourselves in a position like that, is really troubling. And you know, obviously it needs to change.
Do you think things would have unfolded differently if the complainants were not volunteers, if they were professional firefighters? Do you think they've been treated in any way differently as a consequence of that?
Well, I think if they were career firefighters, they would have had different advocates in the NZPFU. I think that the UFBA is quite cautious as an advocate traditionally, and quite quiet, and you know, finds itself not very willing to publicly confront its self-funder, the FENS, and, you know, therefore perhaps isn't that effective as an advocate for volunteers who have really serious problems.
So what, they don't want to wade into it? Is it a culture problem?
I think it is a culture problem, yeah, not just with the organisation, not just with the UFBA, but, you know, perhaps within the culture generally. You know, volunteer brigades tend to be in really little towns, scattered all around the country. It's you know, it's like New Zealand from a number of years ago in some brigades. You know, not most brigades. Most firefighters and most brigades are positive places and good places. And, you know, most firefighters have a really positive experience and aren't involved in anything like this, but too many are. And, you know, just the process of resolving it is not satisfactory. It's clearly not working properly. We need strong advocacy when we have these problems. So
what does FENS, Fire and Emergency New Zealand, need to do to regain the confidence of firefighters, do you think?
Well, I think, you know, the resourcing has really increased in recent times, which is great, and I think that the will is there. But it just hasn't had the impact that it needs to have on the front line. And you know, this particular organisation, well, obviously is rather compromised in terms of making a really strong stand on this issue for the reasons that have become apparent today. It needs to change that. I think volunteer firefighters need to have access to independent advocacy from whoever they choose. You know, they're in a vulnerable position. They do this dangerous, big commitment for their communities for no remuneration. You know, in the unfortunate rare event when they end up subject to something like this happening, they really need to be able to choose who will represent them and to have confidence that they'll be strongly and aggressively advocated for.
Appreciate your time tonight, Tony. That is Tony Sartorius, who is a senior firefighter with 22 years' experience. He's also the founder of VolleyNet, which is the largest online community for volunteer firefighters. The Christchurch Mosque shooter has been officially designated a terrorist entity by the Prime Minister. The designation under New Zealand legislation freezes the assets of terrorist entities and makes it a criminal offence to participate in or support their activities. Jacinda Ardern says it's an important demonstration of New Zealand's condemnation of terrorism and violent extremism in all forms. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
This designation makes the Christchurch gunman the 20th terrorist entity designated under New Zealand law. Jacinda Ardern says it's a significant decision in the country's history.
This is the first time that we have designated an individual as a terrorist in this way. It means that we essentially can crack down on anyone who financially, for instance, may support the March 15 offender.
Ms Ardern says the decision was made immediately after he was sentenced to life in prison without parole last week, but she wanted to give the victims and community time to come to terms with the sentencing before announcing this. Most of the designated terrorist entities in New Zealand are offshore actors, such as ISIS, the Continuity Irish Republican Army and the PKK in Turkey. The Prime Minister says this is to honour New Zealand's international obligations and to ensure this isn't a place where such entities can find financial favour.
Here we're being very clear that we won't simply stick to someone having to be an entity or a political organisation that acts in this way. We will designate individuals as well.
Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters says the terrorist committed one of the worst crimes since the Second World War. So this was an important designation to make.
To deny his personality and his support base any succour whatsoever, not just here, but around the world.
Mr Peters says it's a matter of international common sense and cooperation.
Well, it means that both you and other countries around the world understand who they're dealing with, any likelihood of connectivity that would be of danger to our population or their populations.
Abdulaziz Wahabzada, who chased the gunman out of the Linwood Mosque, is welcoming the move, saying that it's an obvious one to take.
When you kill some innocent people, you become a terrorist. And he killed a lot of innocent people. Of course, he's a terrorist, you know. We're all happy he had that title for himself.
He says helping to deny anyone who tries to financially support him is an important thing to do.
Because whoever's tried to follow him or thinks good about him, they know what they're going to end up.
Mr Wahabzada says love will always win against hate, and there needs to be a wider focus on ways to stop people seeking to support such terrorist activity in the first place. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
It is almost 17 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Spring started today with a cold snap to jolt parts of the South Island out of unseasonably warm temperatures. Heavy snow fell inland and in coastal parts of Canterbury, with a dusting for Ashburton and Temuka. The weather left spring lambs and calves shivering and newly sprung daffodils wilting, with the Met Service warning of a few frosty days ahead. Tracy Neal reports.
The white stuff, an unwelcome visitor for some farmers. Julie and Tony Dobbs had several centimetres of snow fall at their place near Fairley before 8 this morning.
This is our first snowfall this winter. It's just a little bit worrying when we get it at this time of the year. The sheep are about to have their lambs and the dairy farms are into calving. And of course the animals need good grass nutrition at this time of the year.
It missed Miles Anderson's Waimati farm but left bitterly cold wind and rain in its wake. He says luckily there was some warning the bad weather was on its way.
Took the opportunity yesterday to move our lambing ewes to the more sheltered paddocks that were available on the farm in preparation for the cold weather that was coming through, and guessing that a lot of farmers would have done the same.
He spent today putting on woolen sheep covers to his newborn lambs. Temuka resident Charles Scarsbrook woke to snow on the ground around his house.
First day of spring, you think, oh, and the weather's been beautiful, but then that's sort of a lead-in to, if we ever do have a snow event, you know, you get 2 or 3 days of unseasonably warm weather, which is what we've had.
The Temuka pottery owner has lived in the South Canterbury township for about 40 years and knows well enough not to plant his vegetables too soon.
I've been caught before where I've put stuff out early and then it all gets frostbitten and then you have to chuck it away. But I've bought myself a glass house now, so I've only put stuff in the glass house. I've got peppers and tomatoes and lettuces and broccoli.
Meanwhile, it's been fire and ice for a Nelson family on a South Island road trip. Cindy Mosey and Andy Reid took their two boys, Baxter and Logan, salmon fishing on Sunday in the Twizel canals. The trip was cut short by the Mackenzie forest fire.
Oh my gosh, it was horrific. Absolutely gigantic flames, maybe 30 feet up.
This morning they were throwing snowballs in Tekapo before heading to Geraldine, past wilted spring daffodils, shivering newborn lambs and a scenic white landscape.
Tekapo and all the way through Fairley to here, it was completely white. The hills, the trees, snow on the sheep. Yeah.
But the snow has come at the right time for southern ski fields. Remarkable ski area manager Ross Lawrence says the season so far has been less than ideal.
Ideally, we would have about a 2 metre base by now, 2.2 metre base. This year, we're just sitting around 1 metre. So that depending on how hot spring or how warm spring gets, we could get a lot more snow. That's why I'm not a weatherman.
He is hoping the snow will stick around until at least the school holidays later this month.
It's certainly a welcome covering and coating, so I think it'll bring out a few more of the loyalists, and we're going to have a good time going forward.
The Met Service says the snow is expected to clear tonight, but leave a frosty few days ahead. For Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
India continues to break daily coronavirus records with 79,000 cases yesterday alone, meaning the outbreak is now outpacing Brazil and the United States. Total case numbers have now topped 3.5 million. But despite that, India's leaders continue to try to open up the country. One barrier to reviving the economy is getting economic migrants back to the cities, but many are refusing to go back. The ABC's James Oaten reports.
Rampakar Pandit had been working on a construction site in Delhi when India was thrust into a nationwide lockdown in March. Without work, the 38-year-old decided to try to get home to his village, more than 1,000 kilometres away. But on his long journey, he got a call from his wife. His son was gravely ill.
I told police that my son was dying, so please allow me to go to my home. They didn't allow me. Then a photographer took my photo.
That photo became a symbol of the migrant crisis. It showed Rampakar crying on the side of the road, his face contorted in anguish. He eventually got home with the help of some Delhi residents, but it was too late. His son had died.
I couldn't see him one last time. Had I been there, I would have saved him somehow. I will not go back to Delhi at any cost. I won't migrate to another place for work. I'm going to work here, locally.
Rampakar Pandit isn't the only migrant worker refusing to return to the cities. A recent poll found a third would not go back. Some migrants were kicked off their work sites, vital wages were lost, many were branded COVID carriers and humiliated. Months later, and coronavirus is everywhere, even in the villages that were once safe havens. On a construction site in Mumbai, a few who fled the city are back at work. This man says there was simply no work in his village and he'd run out of money. Rajesh Prajapati is the managing director for the developer. He tried to keep his staff on site, guaranteeing food and medical supplies.
So some of the labourers said, it's better to die with my family rather than die outside in the city.
He's now desperate to get the workers back, even offering to pay for their transport.
We just hope that they are ensured enough logistical support so that they can come back easily. And, they don't face problems once again when they are now in that frame of mind to come back and work.
Experts believe India's economy has contracted by 20% during the pandemic. But with coronavirus cases rising so fast, there's no hope of business as usual anytime soon.
The ABC's James Oaten with that report. An investigation has been launched into a flight from a Greek island to Wales that led to more than a dozen positive coronavirus tests and passengers complaining of a complete lack of precautions. The European airline TUI Airways is under immense criticism, and all 193 passengers and crew are having to self-isolate. The BBC's Caroline Davis has this report.
Sunshine getaways to the island of Zante, an appealing prospect to many UK holidaymakers. But for some, travelling back from holiday to Cardiff, it wasn't the return they were hoping for.
As soon as we boarded, we realised that many of the passengers hadn't really been educated about the wearing of face masks. Many of them were wearing them around their chins, underneath their noses. They were taking them off to talk to fellow passengers.
At least 16 cases of COVID-19 have so far been linked to the flight. All passengers on board have been told to self-isolate. Lee Evans says he was only contacted yesterday afternoon by email, 5 days after he flew home.
I just felt they could have contacted us a lot earlier. You know, it's been a bank holiday weekend. The weather's been kind to us. And I've been out and about. And if I'd known I'd have been in self-isolation today, I would not have done some of the activities that I've done, not wishing to put anyone else at risk.
The airline that ran the flight, TUI, have said they were only made aware of the cases by Public Health Wales yesterday. They say that passengers are informed prior to travel and via PA announcements on the flight that they have to wear masks throughout and are not allowed to move around the cabin. Masks can only be removed when consuming food and drink. They say a full investigation is now underway as these concerns weren't reported during the flight or before today. But this isn't the first time holidaymakers returning from Zante to the UK have had symptoms. Last week, local health officials in Plymouth said a group of 18 and 19-year-olds had also tested positive. Zante itself has introduced its own restrictions, including closing restaurants, bars, clubs and cafes at midnight and banning more than 4 people at restaurant tables. It's raised questions about whether there should be localised quarantine for certain high-risk regions rather than entire countries. As UK holidaymakers return home, public health officials are keeping a close eye on new infections.
The BBC's Caroline Davis. It's a year to the day that Brooke MacDonald broke his back. The New Zealand downhill mountain biker suffered the worst crash of his career and lay semi-paralysed on the side of a Canadian mountain. Testament to the strength and determination of the man they call Bulldog, MacDonald has just left New Zealand for Austria with plans to compete at October's World Champs. Joe Porter has more.
Brooke MacDonald was feeling good. Having qualified third fastest for last year's World Champs in Mont-Saint-Anne, he needed just a couple of practice runs before the race. But he never made it to the bottom of the trail, hitting an exposed route on a rock slab that sent him offline and over the handlebars.
I landed straight on my back and bounced, probably a metre high off into the ditch and went to roll over and couldn't roll or couldn't feel my legs. Knew straight away that there was something pretty serious wrong. Can't remember too much because I was in so much shock, but I was wanting to get off the hill as soon as possible.
Semi-paralysed and in extreme pain, race officials tried to take MacDonald off the mountain on the back of a quad bike. He lay suffering for 5 hours before a helicopter finally arrived.
Probably the worst day of my life, sitting there, not knowing what's going on. I was in a lot of pain as well, and the pain medication they were giving me was pretty light, so it wasn't really preventing any pain. So, yeah, I was in agony for quite a long time.
MacDonald had fractured his T12 and L1 vertebrae. He had surgery and spent 3 weeks in hospital in Quebec before being flown to Burwood Spinal Unit in Christchurch, where he had to learn to walk again. Despite being told his riding days might be over, MacDonald was determined to not only get back on the pedals, but race again too.
After my surgery, when I had everything fixed and put back into place and the pressure taken off my spinal cord and the sensation in my legs started to come back, so from when I first started walking, I knew.
MacDonald knew he'd be back on the bike, but recovering from a serious back injury and being back racing in just a year has exceeded even his expectations. He says he's one of the few international athletes to have benefited from the coronavirus pandemic.
Been a blessing in disguise for me because more time to recover and strengthen things that I was weak in and work on stuff that needed working on. So, yeah, I've been pretty lucky.
Back riding downhills as fast as ever, Bulldog says his passion for bikes grew deeper during his rehab.
I feel like I've found a new love for riding. Having such a big accident that kind of could have taken it all away from me, really made me realise how much I enjoy riding my bike, whether it's racing or just riding and enjoying it with friends.
McDonald plans on making this year's World Champs, scheduled for Austria in October, his first race since breaking his back at the same event in 2019. So will the Hawke's Bay haka have any second thoughts as he points his bike down the steep chutes of the Litigation track?
I'd rather be riding my bike and die than when you can walk across the street and get hit by a car and killed. Yeah, especially after my crash, made me realise how important life is and how fast it can change, and you can't just sit on a couch and watch TV 24/7, because it's not living.
Riding bikes down mountains at breakneck speeds might not be everyone's idea of living, but for McDonald, nothing else comes close. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Joe Porter aho.
And we'll put Joe's story up on our Facebook page. There's some remarkable video that you will want to see. A lot of you getting in touch about the COVID card. Len says, who really thinks that millions of people will wear a card on a lanyard around their neck? Please, a chip inserted under the skin at birth may have a better chance of being successfully introduced. Smartphones and EFTPOS transactions are already there along with the COVID app. These are more practical and acceptable ways of tracking people. In this one, the government must keep an open mind towards any organisation willing to help in defeating the spread of COVID-19 in our community. That one's from Kevin. And Dave says, I get sick of hearing about the tracer. It doesn't work on old smartphones. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Earthquake Commission believes it doesn't have the capability to lead any future repair program, with more than 400 reopened claims still flooding in each month. A celebrated entrepreneur says the government isn't moving fast enough to create a COVID card. The Australian state of Victoria has recorded 70 new cases of the coronavirus, the fewest in more than 8 weeks. The chief executive of Taranaki's Green School says a controversial multi-million-dollar government handout to help it expand was never meant to be a grant. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
You basically end up with this sort of virtual online army that goes out and does the attacking on your behalf.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
We really are causing melting of